insight that's going to enable you to take any scale shape and then learn it in just a few seconds or a couple of minutes and then never forget about it again. Never forget how it's constructed, how it's laid out. The brain learns on multiple levels, and one of these levels is called the mental, the logical, the structural. It's like, the left part of the brain that likes math, that's like an explanation. You got visual memory as well. You can recall stuff you've seen. You can recall how things look visually. That's not something you explain to yourself necessarily. So it's not that part of the memory, right? You got kinesthetic memory as well, how something feels. And we use all three when we practice and learn stuff. But the first one, the mental, the logic, the mathematical, structural part of the memory is something we can tap into first when we're trying to learn scale shapes on the neck. And my claim here is that you, in a couple of minutes, as I said, can learn a new scale shape and remember it forever. If you focus on that part of memory. Most people don't. They just start playing it. They look at the paper or whatever chart they have of the scale shape, and they play it, look at it, play it, look at it, play it. So they actually try to store it in the visual part of their memory first. But that's the least effective. If you go through all three levels, one by one, the mental, logical, then the visual, and then the kinesthetic, where you feel your way around the scale, then you can learn in, twice the rate or 10 times the rate even. Just think about learning a scale shape in a couple of minutes and then not having forgotten anything about it next day. What is that worth to you? So let's try to see if we can do this. And I'm going to use an example here, which is the first position minor pentatonic scale. Right, in the key of C here. Right? And we're going to work with that, and I'm going to give you an explanation of how to add the Dorian minor to that same shape. You might be able to do this already, but this is just an example that you can use for anything. And I'm going to talk you through it. And the talking I do is exactly the logical level of understanding how it looks. There might be no system to what you're trying to learn, but you are telling yourself a story of how it looks and why, if you can see systems, make up rules or make up, logical, say, okay, this note, it actually looks like a cross across, whatever you can put to the process that is a story or logic to what you're doing, the better. This works really amazingly. This enables you to really get it in there as fast as possible in just one little 2-minute session. So let's just assume that you have the first position minor pentatonic down, and you want to be able to play the minor pentatonic with the Dorian minor on top of it and go back and forth between it. Play the pentatonic, borrow notes from the Dorian minor with no effort. So how do we do it? Well, we see two charts. Let me just come closer here. Here we got the first position in C minor in the 8th fret, minor pentatonic. So we got I'm just going to assume you know it, so this is quite fast. 8th fret and 11th fret on the two top strings, and then 8th and 10th on the G, the D, and the A string, and then on the low E string we got the 8th and the 11th fret. That's the first position minor pentatonic. If you were to play the first position Dorian minor, which works really well for rock, blues-based rock, then it would look like this. You would have the top two strings. You would not only have the 11th and the 8th fret, you would also have the 10th fret. On the two middle strings, you would not only have from the pentatonic the 10th and the 8th, you would also have the notes in the 7th fret on the D and G. Right? On the two lower strings, the A and the E. On the A string, you would have that string where you have the blue note sometimes, if you're converting your minor pentatonic to a blues scale. But there wouldn't be any additions there. But on the low string, you would have the 8th and the 10th and the 11th. You would have an extra Dorian note there. So the Dorian scale would look like this, or mode. Right? Two shapes on top of each other. So how do we learn them? Well, you look at it. and try to use your logical reasoning to figure out why are the notes there. Let me see if I can come up with some realizations about why the notes are there. Let's take the 2 top strings. We got a note in the 8th and the 11th when it comes to the pentatonic scale. And I can see pretty quickly that I'm just adding a note just before my 4th finger. So 1 semitone under the top note of my pentatonic shape when I have a minor third in between, 3 frets in between the notes. Then I just add a note just right before the 4th finger. Right? Then I shift to the 2 middle strings. So that's a realization. That's a story I tell myself. Okay, so I can remember for tomorrow, if I want to add the Dorian notes to my playing, every time I have a minor third, I just add an extra note just before the top note. Right? Every time I have 3 frets in between my fingers, I add one there. Okay, so next string. Next, 2 middle strings. Okay, so every time I have a whole tone interval, I just add 1 note just below it. Right? And then I will have my addition of the Dorian note. Right? So that's pretty easy, but I also have a whole tone interval on the A string where I have my blue note sometimes, but there's no addition down there. So it's only sometimes that I have that addition when I have whole tones below, right? So I can say sometimes I have a semitone, but not all the way. So I can say in the first position, I have it on the 2 middle strings. See, that's a story as well. On the 2 middle strings, I have an extra note behind the whole tone intervals, but not on the A string. So it's only sometimes that I have. What can I use that for? That's not a rule. We're not talking rules here. We're trying, in that attempt to create a rule and then having an exception that you don't fully control yet. Can't say when or why. I could say that, on the string that I would normally have a chromatic, if I know the blues scale, how to turn the pentatonic into a blues scale, I could say that every time I have a whole tone, but the blue note is in between, if I add it, then I do not have a semitone below. You see? So that is the process. And then, on the low string, I got my minor third interval again. So, whoopty, I got my Dorian note there. So that is consistent, right? With the top and this, like on the 2 top strings. But see, what just happened here is I'm going through the scale and I'm thinking as I do it with the focus of trying to remember by creating rules, by creating a story. How can I explain my way? How would I explain this to somebody who was trying to learn it with a blindfold on, right? How would I explain it? And then you explain it to yourself. It becomes language, it becomes logic, and that will embed the shape in your mind like nothing else if it's the first time or the second or the third time you're looking at it. Because that guides your visual memory. You might have some visual memory, but as soon as you tap into the logic or the reason or the analytical, the left part of the brain, then, I remember. What is it that you remember? You remember how to construct the shape from your memory, right? Let's just try this out. I could go on and say, okay, let's try the pattern below the first position. The pentatonic, just to see how my rule holds up. So I got the 8th and the 6th on the 2 top string, and on the 2 middle strings I got the 5th and 8th and 6th. The 5th and 8th on the 2 middle string, and on the 2 low strings I got the 6th and the 8th. So very symmetrical shape here. Right? And so I could say, okay, if I chart it out and look at where are the notes of the Dorian minor, I would then find that the first I have a whole tone interval. I guess there's a semitone below. Oh yes, there were. What about the next one? Oh, that doesn't sound like it. No, that's not. So this is actually where I have my chromatic interval. If this was a blues scale shape, so there I don't have it. Okay, so no, not there. Because that's okay, so here I have it. Let me see, I got 2 minor thirds in the middle here of the shape. Yeah. So I got I rule just right before the top note there. And then the 2 others here. Yeah. Yeah. So that the rule of putting a semitone below those. So the only exception here of the whole tone is that, again with the blues interval here, right? So just this little story I told myself here will make me remember that shape and the Dorian shape tomorrow as well. And you might say, well, it's not always that you can do this, but you can always do something. You can always talk about how, okay, there's kind of a shape like that. It's symmetrical here, but not there. And it's skewed. Like when it comes to the B string, you can always talk as you are learning, coming up with a mental perspective on what is going on. That's the point. So I can give you a ton of other examples, but if you don't have this level down, then you are going to rely on visual memory. And that is fleeting, much more fleeting than the structural logic memory. So if you just look at the shape, try to learn it, next day you've forgotten some of it, you go back and forth like that all the time. If you got your logic in order, then you won't have to refer to tabs or charts or anything. You'll actually remember it because you have that story. It's much more easier. You must try it in order to really get it. So I hope that was valuable to you, and it will be if you use it. I can guarantee you that. And as always, we got a new program out. You can go check it out. Click the link below. It's a really neat little package here. It's all about how to master the 5 shapes of the pentatonic scale at a level where it's scary, like effortless, with no hesitation, just flying around the fretboard in 5 weeks. That's a promise. So go check it out and use this strategy here. You know, right away when you're trying to learn something new. Tomorrow, I'll give you another strategy like this and say, how can we embed stuff visually? And in the third video, another technique again. So stay tuned for these videos. And remember to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so. Go check us out on Instagram. I think that was all. So see you tomorrow.